Anne had and had not done. It was extraordinary to watch 3 judges leave the courtroom for about 7 minutes. And then return to give a judgment which lasted at least 40 minutes, and the opinion of the public who've been present today is what we witnessed was a show trial, and basically a preordained outcome was just delivered to the public. The other clue to this is that there's been a lot of people inside that court, all very quiet, well behaved, talking quietly. No problem at all. When we came out of the hearing, suddenly there's a lot of security people, and when we talked to one of those individuals, he said he'd been asked to come down, and obviously they were sent because it was a preordained outcome against Anne and Holly. So
Brian, what you're saying is they went out for 7 minutes and they came back and gave their judgment over 45 minutes. What you're saying is that they had already made their mind up even before today.
Of course, absolutely obvious. It was theatre. You cannot go through quite a detailed case where a lot of information is being presented and discussed. You cannot then go out and come to a decision which takes you 40 minutes to deliver.
Right.
It must be preordained.
So in layman's terms,
it's a show trial. It was a show trial in order to actually bring the mother and the daughter back into the family court system, where already the state has said that that the girl is vulnerable, the state needs to protect the girl, and of course, why is the state saying they need to protect the girl? Because ultimately the state wants to shut her up.
Okay.
In that court today, the central issue of the abuse, the rape and abuse of this little girl was not addressed. No, a young lady. It was not addressed.
I believe that one of the perpetrators, the alleged perpetrators, was in court.
Yes, in the first session before lunch. We believe that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah, I can only say believe that's the case.
Okay.
But if you actually analyse what has happened here, of course there's no jury. We have 3 judges clearly setting out to support a fellow judge. That is obvious. And it wasn't just the appeal is not upheld. The judge was highly critical of the family and what they have tried to do to protect Holly at the end of the day.
Okay, Brian, I know it's early days, but what would be your advice to the people that are watching this? What can we all do? What can we all do to help Holly, to help Robert Green, and to help Anne?
Unless the public of this country wake up in sufficient numbers to get behind this case and to say, no, we are not having the abuse of children condoned by the court, unless we get people in vast numbers to stand up and be counted, this court case sets a precedent that the state can take any child from anybody without any evidence or other cause. We are very, very close to a Soviet system where children can simply be taken away, and if the parents dare to complain, they will be put in psychiatric units, as the mother has already been. And the fact that today with this case there's no media, there is no BBC, there are no cameras, tell you that in Britain 2012 we are watching a judicial system which is utterly corrupt,
running amok.
And I am going to use this occasion to say that John Hemming MP has been brave enough to stand up on a stage in public and be filmed saying that in his opinion as an MP the family courts are utterly corrupt, and he has called for the head of the Family Law Division to stand down. So now we have MPs admitting that the judicial system in this country is not only corrupt, many of us are now totally convinced that it is so corrupt it will act to protect paedophiles, provided they are people of status in society. If you are somebody at the bottom end of the social spectrum and you are caught being a paedophile, the state will throw everything against you. If you are at the upper echelons and you are hidden amongst the senior police, judiciary, military, whatever, the state will protect you.
Brian, if I could just interrupt you, when you was talking about the BBC, ITV, etc., the national media not reporting the story, what I have to tell you is that there were 3 Sky News teams outside. They're waiting for Ryan Giggs. They would not, even with all these people there, they refused to report this.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just back up what you just said. The national media, they are not putting this across, and many other cases, Brian.
Well, what we've got to do now is start asking the questions of the media. It's not enough to say the BBC will not report. We need to say, who are the people in the BBC who are stopping this? We need their names, we need to know who they are, and we need to bring them into the public domain. Let's not try and expose an organisation blandly called the BBC. Let us identify the people who are protecting the paedophiles by not reporting what's going on.
Well, the BBC, Brian, risk of teaching my granny how to suck eggs here, they are taking £3.4 billion from the licence payers of this country every year, and they do not represent us, they represent a minority. And I suggest that the BBC, if you don't pay your Sky bill, they close you down. If you don't pay your television licence, they'll take you to court. That is state-run TV, and that brings us back to the communism that you were talking to, that seems to be practising, and all of us people in this country, they are doing something to us that is taking away our freedom of speech, and there are good people still here. Well, we've got them around you at the moment, Brian.
Well, the thing I will say is that the attack is on all of us. It doesn't matter what status you are, it doesn't matter whether you're professional or unemployed, it doesn't matter whether you are black, white, Muslim, Christian. This state is now attacking its own people. And it is obvious that people in Parliament not only know what's going on, they are part of the child abuse system. We have recently written to Sarah Tether, Families and Children's Minister, and we asked a simple question. When it says in your responsibilities that you are responsible for marketing and commissioning of children's services, we simply ask, what does that mean? It sounds like commercial exploitation of children. She will not answer the question. She has not answered a freedom of information request. She has gone silent. And let's not forget, I'm not now talking about Conservatives or Labour. We're talking a Lib Dem, a Liberal Democrat MP who is hiding to cover up her involvement with what is happening with children. We know from experts amongst the public here that Kent County Council has spent over £100,000 effectively trafficking British children out of the country. We know that the total amount of money that barristers and law firms are making from children's cases is about £20 billion a year.
Unbelievable.
This is massive. And if anybody says to me, David Cameron does not know what's going on, he absolutely knows.
Absolutely. Well, can I interrupt you again? I actually had captured, if you like, Nick Clegg just before the election, and I said to Nick Clegg, what are you going to do about institutional paedophile rings that are operating in this country now? He said, I don't know what you mean by institutional.
Absolutely, because they will deny everything. They cannot look at the evidence, because if they look at the evidence, they're hung by their own petard.
Okay, get this guy.
Here we come.
Okay, God bless you, Brian. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
welcome. Can I just say, welcome to the Gestapo. Here we have the general public being thrown out of their own court. It is extraordinary, isn't it? Extraordinary.
Yeah, all these people here, and now we have 3 officers. Okay. Let's hear it with Brian Gary.
Well done, Brian. Can you repeat that?
And of course, can we hear it for Holly Gregg and Brian Gary and Robert Green and Holly
This is not justice. Well, thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you may have seen the story written on page 3 of the UK column. You may be familiar with it, but obviously I'll go into it in a lot more detail now, and I will invite a few questions if there's anything you'd like to tell me afterwards. Now, I'm going to tell the story. It's a complex story, as these stories tend to be, and I will be moving around a little bit chronologically, so I hope not to confuse everybody. I'll try to make it as comprehensive as I possibly can, but you'll understand once I get into it is why I've had to juggle around a little bit. There are two key elements in this story that I think most of you in this room will recognise straight away. One is the sickening and harrowing treatment dished out to defenceless victims. The other is the indifference and the collaboration of the authorities afterwards. And in this particular case, we believe it takes this to the very top of the government in Scotland. It goes that far. And I'll demonstrate why that is the case. Now, first of all, I'll tell you the story how it began. The story revolves around Aberdeen, and it revolves around a family called the Mackey family. It's a man called Dennis Mackey, his wife Anne, and they had 2 children. First, a boy called Greg, and the second, a few years later, a daughter called Holly. Holly was born with Down syndrome and had a lot of other serious medical difficulties as well. She was not expected to live, but live she did with enormous willpower, which I can testify to right now. Now, the family were, sort of, I suppose, a normal family as one would expect, although Dennis was a womanizer and could be violent at times. But the marriage went on. I'll take you up to 2000. In the year 2000, when Holly was 20, there was a violent disagreement between Dennis and Anne Mackey. She's Anne Gregg now, which is a maiden name which is reverted to for reasons which will be obvious. Now, during the course of this violent argument, the husband got so violent that Anne had to take her daughter with her physically away from the house because things had got so bad. To cut a long story short, Holly became hysterical and demanded to be taken back to the house. And her mother said, "Why have we got to go back, Holly? Why have we got to go back?" And Holly said, "We've got to go back because Daddy will kill Max." Max was Holly's pet dog, to whom she was devoted. So, of course, the mother said, "Of course not, Holly. He's not going to kill Max. He's just angry with Mummy. He's not going to do anything to Max." "No, you'll kill Max if we don't go back. We've got to go back for him." So Anne couldn't understand this almost hysterical behaviour by her daughter. But then, through prompting her, it all came out. She told her mother that from the age of 6, her father had started sexually abusing her. A little later on, he had encouraged the brother to join in. So, from the age of 6, Holly was being abused by her father. Anne immediately, of course, went to the police station, Bucksburn Police Station in Aberdeen, to report this, and put the report through, of course. Anne, of course, initially didn't believe it. She thought this was too incredible, but she asked Holly, who was a very truthful girl, and she said, "No, Mummy, it's all happened, Mummy. But Daddy said he would kill Max, and he'd kill you if I ever told anybody about it." Now, this was reported to the police, and of course Anne and Holly naturally left the household to find somewhere else to live. That wasn't the end of the story, because this happened in May 2000. On the 24th of August 2000, the story developed even further. When Holly said to Mummy, "I started telling about other things." She says, "There were other people, you know, Mummy. It wasn't just Daddy and Greg. There was other people as well." So Anne said, "Are you sure about this? Are you absolutely sure?" "Yes, Mummy, and I'll tell you who they are." And she named another 14 abusers, men and women, and amongst those abusers were a sheriff, Sheriff Graham Buchanan, a police officer, Terry Major, 2 nurses, 2 social workers, including the social worker whose responsibility it was to care for Holly, and a number of other policemen as well, including an accountant and another lawyer. Now, at that time, of course, then Anne immediately rang the police station again to ask, A, what progress they've got, and B, that she had a lot of other names to give to them. So, the police officer invited her round to Bucksburn Police Station the following day, which would be the 25th of August 2000. And there, she was met by a police officer called Leanne Davidson and a social worker called Nicola Foote. Now, Anne and Holly together sat and went through all the allegations, gave all the details, all the names, and later on, the Leanne Davidson said she wanted to speak to Anne on her own and that the social worker would take care of Holly for a while. Well, the social worker, no sooner had she got Holly by herself that she injected a needle into her leg, called her a liar, and with the injection there was a substance that disorientated Holly. Now, when Holly had finished, or when Anne had finished with Leanne Davidson, the officer who was doing the investigation, she noticed that her daughter was in great distress, and of course, being Down syndrome, she couldn't explain exactly what had happened other than she'd been injected. Anne immediately sort of said to the police, I want a doctor to see her now, you've done something to her, I want a doctor here. Of course, the police kept her there saying they were trying to find a doctor, but they couldn't find one. And she sat there for 3 hours until, presumably, the drug had started to wear off. In fact, Anne took the daughter to her own doctor the following day, and of course, he couldn't find anything, but he said, well, the kind of drug that was injected would be one that would be not possible to trace 24 hours later. Now, obviously, all that information then had been given to the police, and Anne expected that action would be taken. But time went on. For a week or 2 weeks, nothing happened. 11 days after Anne had been to the police station in Aberdeen to give out all the names of these well-known and eminent people, there was a knock on her door. 10 people from the local psychiatric institution grabbed Anne, pulled her trousers down, injected her, and threw her into a van, leaving Holly screaming in the flat that they had. She was taken to Cornhill Hospital in Aberdeen, where the doctor concerned, responsible for this, a man called Dr. Alistair Palin, described her as schizophrenic. Fortunately, Anne is a very resolute and smart woman, and she very, very cleverly played the game with the people. Although she was terrified for herself and even more terrified for her daughter, who meantime had been handed back to her father, and she managed to get out after a few days from Cornhill Hospital. What she did then was another very smart thing. She went straight to an eminent psychiatrist, one of the leading psychiatrists in Scotland, called Dr. Ellen Smith, went to her at her own expense and said, Dr. Smith, I've never had any mental problems in my life. I've been put into an institution where Dr. Alistair Palin has certified that I am schizophrenic. I don't think there's anything wrong with me too. Will you do all the tests you can on me and come out with an honest appraisal of my mental state? Dr. Smith did a full appraisal, which obviously we have the documentary evidence, saying there was absolutely nothing wrong with Anne whatsoever. She'd been virtually kidnapped to try to make sure that she couldn't say anything, to be discredited, and for Holly to be given back to her paedophile father. And of course, they were so worried about all the names that had been mentioned. Now, Anne got back home and got with Holly and all the rest of it, and tried very hard to get things going. But the case never took off, which I don't suppose will surprise anybody in this room, knowing the things that we know. And at the time, the case was effectively blocked by the Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen. Now, the Procurator Fiscal in Scotland is like the Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales. They decide whether charges should be laid and all the rest of it, having examined the evidence. Now, Mrs. Angelini was the Procurator Fiscal at the time, later to become Lord Advocate, which is very relevant to the story as it stands now. So nothing at all happened, despite all the pressure that Anne was putting on, and with the help of some of her lawyers as well, but nothing happened, and the whole case was dismissed. The police actually said that they had only interviewed Dennis Mackey, and 2 years later the son Greg Mackey, which they have confirmed in writing, but we shall show that that is false in a little while. Now, Anne tried everything from that time to try and get the story out. There were other issues, including financial issues, divorce issues, which I won't go into during the course of this talk, but a lot of very, very serious issues. We take the story on. Anne was getting help from some advisors who were trying their best to try and help her. And one of the things that did crop up in this time was that Anne was awarded, after a long battle, £13,000 from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. But there was no record of any crime having been committed. So public money was given to a woman who officially had not been the victim of crime. How could it be? To shut them up, obviously. But no crime had been committed, as far as the law was concerned. So time went on, and about a year ago, I was invited in to try and see if I could do anything to help the story along, to try and bring the people to justice, and to perhaps bring the story into the public domain, which I have tried hard to do. When I started my investigations, I had the same kind of problems. Everybody wanted to block it and everything like that. But we did have a breakthrough with the media on the 19th of April, 2009, when journalists from the News of the World took up the story in a rather sort of muted form, but it picked up on the fact about the payment from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. I did a story on Holly, which is also picked up by the local paper where Anne and Holly now live in Shropshire, where they had to flee to because of the threats and abuse that they were suffering at the time. They had to escape from Aberdeen and from their home country, Scotland. Now, when this became apparent that things were not moving in any way at all, we had another bit of more support, because suddenly we got a call from the BBC Scotland in Glasgow, from one of their senior investigators, a man called Mark Daly, who some of you may remember as doing something about the secret policeman, where he covertly joined the police force in Cheshire to actually find about racism that existed in the police force. And for this, he was granted an award, and there was a big programme on it, and he became very famous. He approached Anne and Holly and myself and said, BBC would like to do a big story on this. Could we assist them? Could we provide the documentation, which Anne had very, very skillfully retained? And but it had to be on the basis that it was an exclusive for the BBC. It was confirmed that 2 programmes had been commissioned, one on BBC Television Scotland, one on BBC Radio Scotland, and that Panorama were going to do a full story that would be broadcast nationally. Mark Daly, having all the evidence, everything that he could see about this story, it was backed up, all the contradictions, all the false things that the police and the judicial people and even people from the National Health Service had made, all the false statements, all there, all blatant, and they were happy to go ahead with it. Mark told me that this was a story that would go round the world. He said, this is one of the worst stories I've ever heard, but I know there are other cases in Scotland concerning paedophilia that we're looking into as well, and of course the level of corruption by the authorities made this doubly appalling. Now, this went on for about 6 weeks. We had lots of discussions with the BBC team, and everything was set to go. On the 10th of June 2009, I received a call from a distraught Mark Daly. And he said, he said, Robert, he said, I'm sorry, I've got some really bad news for you and Anne and Holly. And I said, well, what's that, Mark? He said, we can't do the programme. I said, what do you mean you can't do the programme? You said, you even got in writing that you're going to do the programme. Well, how can it be? He says, I can't talk about it, he says, but we were threatened. We've been told we cannot not only do Holly's story, but we can actually do no more investigations into any stories concerning paedophilia in Scotland. If we do, we will be sacked. The 3 of us, that is Mark Daly, Cathy Long from BBC Radio Scotland, and Liam McDougall of Panorama. We will be sacked. I said, Mark, you can't allow this to happen. He said, well, we fought our corner. He said, we believe the story. It's absolutely 100%. But that is what we were told. So I said, Mark, who told you this? I said, who told you? And what kind of person would want to prevent a story like this coming out? So terrible. This sweet little girl and and 7 other child victims that we knew about. Who would actually want to stop this story coming out? He says, I can't tell you, Robert. He says, I can't talk to you anymore. He says, I can't tell you. He says, we'll all be sacked. So, obviously, I pressed with the BBC, with the Director General Mark Thompson and the head of the BBC Trust, Sir Michael Lyons. Of course, did I get anywhere with anybody? No. All I got letters saying, Mr. Green, if you wish to complain, we have a particular forum for that, the complaints department of such and such a place, as if I were complaining about someone using a naughty word at 7 o'clock in the evening. That is how it was treated. Mark Daly never contacted me again, apart from sending a letter apologising to Anne and making a few unfair comments, but nevertheless saying that he believed in the case and he believed everything that he had been told. Now, this obviously presented us with a setback, because we were convinced that if the BBC had got hold of it, which they promised to do, the story would have been out last summer and the world would have known about it. But of course this was a setback for us. Nevertheless, we persisted, kept the pressure on. One of the things I must say in this case, working for Anne and Holly, they are the 2 of the bravest women I've ever come across. Nothing frightens them. They've been through hell, but they are so determined, not only for justice for Holly, but justice for the other children that have been abused, and all the other children in Scotland who are being abused now and will be abused in the future because of the inaction and the collaboration of the authorities. So it's absolutely determined. Nothing will frighten them. In fact, in August last year, they were intimidated. A shot was fired at the window of their home in Shropshire, a quiet little village where nothing ever happens, where crime is virtually unknown. But it bounced off the window, fortunately. But it was at head height, and either of them could have been injured or even killed. The police are supposed to be reinvestigating the case after I came into it. They said they would look at it again, but they didn't do anything. They never made any attempt to interview Anne and Holly. They just stayed up in Aberdeen, and nobody did anything. When the shot was fired, I emailed Alex Salmond, who had already told about the case, I'd already informed him what was going on, and the fact that we felt that the Lord Advocate, a member of his government, was deeply involved in the case. And when the shot occurred, I emailed him, and I also called the Chief Constable in Aberdeen, Grampian Police, to say that if anything happened to my clients as a result of this, I would hold them personally to blame. They had all the time that they could possibly have to look at this case, dangerous, vicious people, and they'd done nothing about it. And now, because we were putting the pressure on, there was a real threat to the lives of my clients. Well, they did in fact get in quick time, 2 officers from the Grampian Police were sent down to Shropshire to interview my clients. This took place on the 8th of September. We met at the main police station in Shrewsbury, and we were taken to one of the houses that they use to interview victims of rape, which are not as sort of deterring as a police station would be, a little bit slightly more relaxed, if that is the right word. And we went to the house. Anne was interviewed upstairs by one of the police officers, accompanied by 2 of the people from the Mercia force. And Holly was interviewed downstairs by another officer, Lisa Evans, accompanied by another police officer from the Shrewsbury area, and a social worker as witness. I was not allowed to sit in at the interviews, but I was allowed to sit next to a very thin partition door. Holly was being interviewed in the lounge. There's a wooden sliding door there to connect it with the kitchen. I was able to sit right next to the door with my notebook. Because Holly has hearing difficulties, the conversation was at a higher decibel level than perhaps would have been normally in a conversation, so I was able to hear just about everything that was said. And I sat there for 3.5 hours listening to this poor girl relating and reliving all the horrors that had been inflicted upon her for year after year. She went through everything, told about every name, the sheriff, Sheriff Graham Buchanan, all the others, named them. Most of the rapes, in fact, took place at the home of the sheriff's sister, Evelyn Buchanan. It was absolutely awful. But Holly, the thing that I think also made a great impression on me was the bravery of Holly. She went through this. It was I'm sure all of you here could understand a woman being asked to relive multiple rape over and over again, to face questioning about it. But for 3.5 hours, she stood her ground. Everything she told me was everything I'd heard before, exactly consistent with what she told the BBC, exactly consistent with all the documentary evidence we'd had. And so the interview went forward. 3.5 hours, and she was absolutely magnificent. But the words that haunted me and still do, when the police officer, when Lisa Evans was saying, "How many times did this happen to you, Holly? How many times were you raped?" And she would just said the words over and over, over and over. It was horrifying. But she was fantastic. And I thought maybe we might make a bit of progress there. However, I'll go back a little bit in date time because I want to bring in Elisha Angelini at this point, who I was making allegations that she had been involved in the initial case. It's very unfortunate that he was promoted from Procurator Fiscal to Lord Advocate because the Lord Advocate is in charge of all criminal prosecutions in Scotland. So she is the top person in Scotland. Now, I had a few letters between myself and the Crown Office, and one in particular came from Andrew McIntyre, who's the head of Victims and Diversity there. And what Mr McIntyre had to say was that he'd spoken to Mrs Angelini, and she couldn't remember the case at all, didn't know anything about it, and wasn't even in situ at the time. Well, it is a matter of public record that Mrs Angelini became Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen on the 21st of July 2000, 5 weeks before Anne and Holly reported the names of the other members of the rape gang. So I immediately pointed out to Mr McIntyre that he was incorrect in that. The Procurator Fiscal was there at the time. Chronologically, we could prove that was the case. He started to get a little bit flustered about this, and he said, well, he said, it must have been some of the other people in her office who were dealing with the case, but Mrs Angelini knows nothing about it. I said, are you serious? This is a case that's taken place in Aberdeen, not only of this magnitude, but someone we already know is a close personal associate of hers, Sheriff Graham Buchanan. And the boss was not told about this terrible case. Are you seriously telling me that? He said, well, no. He says, well, that's all I can think of. However, we had one other trump card to play that he didn't know about, and obviously Angelini did not know about. Because in our possession, we had a letter. And the letter was written by Brian Adam MSP, who was Anne's representative in the Scottish Parliament at the time. This letter, which we have a copy of, is dated the 27th of October 2000, 4 months, or 3 months after Mrs Angelini had taken office. The letter was written specifically to Mrs Angelini, asking her what progress she was making on the case. Not only that, we have Mrs Angelini has still gone on protesting that she knew nothing of the case, but I have a letter here with her name on it from the 12th of July 2001, specifically about Holly's case, written from Angelini's office to Anne and Holly's solicitor. So the Lord Advocate of Scotland has lied and lied again, and we can prove that. The rest of the case is going to be hard to get at because every obstruction is going to be placed in our way. But we've already established that the Lord Advocate, the head of all criminal prosecutions in Scotland, has lied. She's lied to the people of Scotland about her involvement in this case. There's no question about that. And if the Scottish Government were not corrupt, she would have been dismissed a long time ago, as I'd urged Mr Salmond and Mr McCaskill, the Justice Minister, to do. Now, returning to the case itself, again, we got the usual delays from the Crown Office, who's supposed to be investigating it. And in December, after sort of pressure to what's going on, we got a letter saying that the Crown Office had decided not to take any further action because there was insufficient evidence. Now, not only myself, but a team of very hard-working, highly intelligent and competent people in Scotland who can't be named at the present time, have also been working very hard with me and with my clients on this case. And between us, we have established that the police did not interview a single named person other than Holly. And Holly named 24 people, as I could hear of, on the 8th of September in Shrewsbury. 16 abusers and 7 victims, other than herself, 8 victims, she was one of them, 7 other child victims. So the police, Grampian Police, could not be bothered to interview a single member of the people who've been named. We also discovered that in the earlier investigation in 2000, when they were first supposed to look at the case, the one that was blocked by Angelini, they actually only interviewed Dennis Mackey, the father, and the son, Greg Mackey, 2 years later, which they had admitted to. However, once again, I have a document here written by an officer of the Grampian Police called Innes Walker, and this is dated the 7th of May 2003, and in it here he refers that there 11 people have been named. It should have been 14 other than the father and the brother, and that he's investigated it. But the police have said they only talked to 2 people. So once again, absolute nonsense, lies by the Grampian Police. And we know that they have done exactly the same thing in 2009. Nothing should affect Mrs. Angelini. Nothing should be done to embarrass this poor woman who is Lord Advocate of Scotland. No matter what she's done, no matter how many children have been abused and raped at this present time, the Lord Advocate of Scotland does not want to be embarrassed because she's involved in it. And the Scottish Government are colluding in this disgraceful conduct. Now, what we've been doing since the 4th of December was to keep more pressure on, and fortunately some of the media in Scotland, like the Firm and the Press and Journal in Aberdeen, have been very good in putting information out. Now, on the 17th of November, the Firm put in a strong story attacking Angelini's involvement. Of course, they got the paperwork that we provided for them, and they very courageously went in, and they were the first real people in Scotland to really do so in a big way, to attack Angelini. Immediately, a team was sent from Angelini's office at the Crown Office, more or less threatening to put the Firm out of business unless they did a retraction and an apology straight away. The Firm did this, but it was under the most severe duress. I think if they'd been able to stood their ground, any court action would never have gone. It was a big bluff. But it's all right for me to say that. The Firm has 40 employees. They were on the spot at the time, and I can understand why they perhaps made that concession at the time. But they know as well as we do that Angelini and the rest of them have been up to no good. Now, the other thing that we discovered a little bit later on was that Mrs. Angelini had secretly been using a private law firm to do this. A law firm, an Edinburgh law firm, a very eminent firm in Scotland called Levy and McRae. And the person responsible for this was the senior partner in Levy and McRae, a man called Peter Watson. Now, I contacted Mr. Watson when I discovered this information, which he thought was top secret. And I said to him, Mr. Watson, would you tell me first if you actually been dealing with, on behalf of Mrs. Angelini? And if so, is Mrs. Angelini paying your fees, which we would have no quarrel with if that's the case, or is it being paid by the Scottish taxpayer? Is it being purloined from public funds, which is a totally different reason indeed? If the Lord Advocate has been perverting the course of justice, and now she is using public money to conceal the facts of the story from the Scottish public, that is a serious matter and a criminal matter. Mr. Watson got very embarrassed, sent a rather offensive email back to me saying, who the hell are you, type of thing, why should I talk to you? And I just said, well, it's up to you, Mr. Watson. You can answer the question or you can't. Anyway, he still refused to answer it. We do have a document, which I haven't got with me, and it's a kind of a privileged one at the moment, but we have a document to show that, yes, he was, and he threatened one of the information providers with defamation if they mentioned anything more about Angelini's involvement in this case. We also know that he sent general threats to every editor in Scotland, saying that they would be most severely dealt with if any of them ever mentioned Mrs. Angelini's connection in any way with the Holly Gregg case. So we have a high-level attempt to intimidate the press of Scotland, the media of Scotland, and the whole of the UK, because Google have been threatened as well. Now, I'm going to go back with one other item, and one very sinister item, because at the moment we are using everything we can, the documentation, to actually bring the people to justice. It's a hard job when you've got the police, the judiciary, and the politicians who are in power in Scotland at the moment, all against you, who don't want to stop this case, going ahead, despite the overwhelming weight of evidence. I'm absolutely sure if it was Angus and Aggie who've got the chip shop in Gorbals, they'd have been banged up in jail years ago. But because it's Sheriff Buchanan, because Angelini is involved, everything has to be blocked. And police officers, because not only is the police officer Terry Major involved, but two other police officers, Leanne Davidson, which we know, and Innes Walker, who wrote that letter, who is now a chief inspector, have also served to pervert the course of justice in this case. So it's a very bad thing, and lots of people are going to go down when it finally comes to light. I'm determined that it will come to light in due course by one means or another. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And I think when the BBC said this is a story that will go around the world, the worst they had ever heard, I don't think they were too far wrong, although there are some really horrific stories about that I've heard about as well, which compare with it in many, many ways, but it is horrifying. Now, there's another side to this story as well, and a very sinister side to the story, but I will go back in time on this. I'm going to go back to 1997. Now, Anne Gregg, when she was 11 years old, her father died, and her elder brother, who was 6 years older, called Robert, who was known as Roy in the family, was a very good young man, a very honourable young man, and he decided he would take the responsibility of looking after his younger sister and his widowed mother. And so that was the case, so he looked after them as best he could. When Anne had children, Roy was also a wonderful uncle to the two children, to Greg, and especially to Holly, because of her problem of having Down syndrome. And he worked very hard, he was devoted to her, he gave lots of time to her, he used to work very hard for charities to raise funds for Down syndrome victims, and he was just marvellous in that way. He never married, he was a bachelor, but he was a bar manager, he was very popular, he used to like to play golf, he liked sports, he liked to read, he enjoyed company, having a chat with all the lads and all the rest of it. He was just a really straightforward chap that we know plenty of people like that. He was one of those people, and devoted to his family. On the 17th of November 1997, on a lonely road just outside Aberdeen, just to the north of the city, Roy Gregg's body was found in a burning car. At the time, of course this was 1997, remember 3 years before Holly had given all the information about the abusers, no one really knew what had happened. Anne said the family couldn't understand. He was he had no history of depression or mental problems or anything like that. He was a pleasant, well-liked person. He had no known financial problems, no health problems, no problems with relationships. He was just a straightforward, happy guy who enjoyed his life. Why would he be found on his own in a burnt-out car? The pathologist was a man called Dr. James Grieve, who I spoke to recently, who conducted the autopsy, and he decided that the autopsy and the cause leading to the cause of death should be death by smoke inhalation. The other doctor who performed the autopsy was a lady doctor, Dawn Marie Chalmers, who I've now discovered is Dawn Marie Kelsey, and is practicing as a GP in Aberdeen. I have to say, since speaking to Dr. Grieve, I've also tried to speak to Dr. Kelsey, but she has disappeared. And even the people in the surgery in Old Aberdeen do not know what's happened to her. She's disappeared off the face of the earth. Once I wanted to talk to her. Very odd. We've also discovered today that Dr. Grieve is actually the Crown Office pathologist. And when we had we didn't know this at the time, but when I interviewed him, he got very nervous, and he said, near the end of it, he says, "It sounds as if you're trying to implicate me with all this." And I said, "With all what?" He said, "Whatever you're talking about." And I said, "Well, we're not trying to implicate anybody." I said, "We just want the truth." I said, "If you acted honestly, then there's no problem. But I will tell you, Dr. Grieve, and you're an expert, but let me tell you this, because I've been doing a little research myself, although I know nothing about these things, but I have talked about people who do know what they're talking about. And one of the first things that they have said is that it's very, very, what we should say is it was described as an unexplained death, but probably suicide. That was how everybody was led to believe it was going to be. It was a suicide. I said, first of all, I said, I do understand that it's very rare for anyone to commit suicide by setting fire to themselves. It's too painful. Sometimes happens in political demonstrations or people who've got a previous history of being very disturbed. But that didn't apply to Roy. You must accept it's very rare for people to kill themselves in that way. It is just so awful and painful and unpleasant, as I'm sure we can all imagine. And I said, so why would it be that you didn't advise an inquest on this? So Dr. Reeve, again, got very nervous and said, oh, well, I just go on the facts. I didn't know about there's a motive for murder or anything like that. I said, well, even without the motive for murder, someone being found in a burning car is almost certainly indicative of arson, which is usually used to actually, not only to cover up other crimes, but to destroy evidence as well. But he couldn't answer. He said, oh, well, I just made my decision on what I saw. And since then, he's had no contact with me whatsoever. Now, for many, we talk about the autopsy. We've only recently served the autopsy. For 9 years, Anne had been actually trying to get hold of the autopsy about her brother's death. And each time the Crown Office either ignored her requests. Now I think we can see why. We eventually got it. I applied for it, and they told me that they did have the autopsy, but it would be better if a doctor that they appointed would call us about it rather than send it to us and explain what the autopsy was all about, because we might not understand it. We might misunderstand what's in this autopsy. So one of our doctors will ring you and he'll explain it fully to you, exactly all the implications and what everything means, because you probably won't understand it. So at this point I said, well, look, send us the autopsy. We'd rather have it. If we don't understand it, we've got doctors we know who will explain it to us. So don't worry, just send us, and if we're not sure about anything, we'll find a doctor to explain it to us. Eventually, they did send the autopsy. This was 3 weeks after they'd said they weren't going to conduct the investigation. It arrived on New Year's Eve 2009. In the autopsy, it's made clear that a good deal of alcohol was found in the stomach of Robert Gregg. Like Robert Gregg being the bar manager, he was a very moderate drinker. He didn't drink a lot of alcohol at all. The alcohol that was found in his stomach was a brown liquid which was thought to be whiskey. Robert Gregg, unlike most Scotsmen, hated whiskey. He never drank whiskey. As well as that, there was severe damage to Robert's skull. 2 ribs were broken, and his sternum was broken. All the experts, they're acting informally at the moment. I would like a proper formal analysis of this, but and we've talked to a lot of people, believe that the most likely thing was that he was severely beaten to cause the injuries that occurred, had alcohol poured down his throat, and was then thrown into the burning car to die. We also believe that one of his rescuers, or so-called rescuers, was one of the murderers, because we discovered, Anne discovered, that the person who had allegedly rescued him and got a medal from the Royal Humane Society was known to Dennis Mackey. Now, where this all fits together is, if I take you to 2001. Now, I should explain, if you're not aware of this, people who have Down syndrome don't necessarily link things together. But people like Holly, she is a competent witness. She's been described as a competent witness, not only by the police themselves, but also by medical experts who've examined her at the time to make sure that whatever she said could be taken seriously. So, that being the case, Holly there's no question about anything that she said. In fact, one of the experts actually said that Holly does not know how to lie. In her consideration, she does not know how to lie. Also, people who suffer from Down syndrome have very vivid memories and long memories. And they remember things in great detail, far more so than people who don't suffer from that kind of affliction. And they also don't have the ability to fabricate or close things from their mind. So you can see already what a terrible effect that must have had on poor Holly, who couldn't even blank out these terrible rapes and ordeals that she'd suffered for 14 years. But obviously, could there be a better witness I don't think it's difficult to find. I think it'd be very difficult to find a more reliable witness than Holly Gregg. So this went on, and we worked very hard to try and sort out what is going on here. It's a very, very bad story. The Crown Office, just going back to the death of Roy Gregg, in 2001, Holly came forward with some more information to her mother that was previously unknown, that will explain everything that I've just told you. One day, she said, "Mummy," she says, "I have to tell you," she says, "you know," she says, "Uncle Roy, he found Daddy having sex with me." Anne said, "What?" Holly said, "Yes, Mummy, yes, Mummy. He came in one day, he came to the house one day, and he came in and he found Daddy having sex with me." And Anne said, "What happened then? What happened?" Uncle Roy said to Daddy, "Don't you ever touch Holly again. Don't you ever touch her." And Anne said, "Can you remember when this was? When did this happen?" And through a process of elimination, they had found that it must have taken place between 2 and 3 weeks prior to Roy's death. So Roy Gregg was murdered, we believe, on the instructions of Dennis Mackey. He was supposed to have an alibi at the time. As far as we know, he was working on an oil rig. And the rescuer, by the way, was another oil rig worker who he knew, or other members of the rape gang. Every single member of the rape gang is a potential murder suspect. So that is the story of Roy Gregg and what has happened there. So we are obviously pressing very hard on that side of the story as well. So we have multiple rapes, and we have almost certainly a murder here. I asked Anne about her brother before he died, and I said to her, "Was there anything strange about Roy just before he died?" And she said, "Well, not really. We were all trying to think that. It seems he died in such strange circumstances, but we couldn't understand anything at all. And I've gone over in my mind, was there something strange about his behaviour prior to his death? And now I know what I know." She says, that amplifies the fact. He said, "All I can say is, knowing my brother as I did," he said, "he was a person, if there's a problem, he'd usually like to think about it first of all. He wouldn't just come out with it, he'd think about it." He says, "And I did think at the time there was something on his mind that he wanted to tell me about." He said, "But obviously I could have had no knowledge it was something of this magnitude." I said, "It must have been just some personal problem. But there was something there that I knew he would talk to me about at some point, but he was just thinking about it." I think another important thing just to mention is that it was Holly's 18th birthday, 6 days after Roy died. And he had planned the party for her. This was all planned. He brought a beautiful bracelet. So there was absolutely no reason why he would kill himself. And why would he, as he was so protective towards his sister and his niece? The last thing that he would ever want to do would be to leave them to the mercy of Dennis Mackey and the gang. But he had to be silenced, to shut him up, so that he couldn't testify, not only against Mackey, but Sheriff Buchanan and Police Officer Terry Major and the nurses and the social workers and the solicitor and all the rest of the despicable gang. He had to be shut up. So this is the case that we're having to deal with at the moment. It is a really, really appalling case, I think you'll agree, having heard all this. We've got a long way to go yet. We are getting some support from some of the politicians in Scotland now at various levels who really believe that this case, that the lid cannot be kept on this case for much longer because we have so much documentary evidence. What we are looking for is someone in the media who's bold enough to do something about this. What I was sick and tired of hearing the major people in the media say, "Oh, we can't print, there's no proof, we'll get sued," and all this kind of thing. And I said, "No, you won't." I said, "We've got the evidence here. There's no way this can come to court, and we could call us all as witnesses, Holly, Anne, myself, the rape gang, the rest of the victims. Do you really think that anybody is going to take you to court on this?" But no, well, I don't think it's to do with litigation. I think it's other people putting pressure on them, but there we are. But I was very concerned that nothing was happening. What I did in October, just going back to the 3rd of October, I decided that I would go and make a public speech at the Quaker Hall in Edinburgh. And in doing so, I would name all the members of the gang publicly and all the known victims. Because I wanted them, if somebody was going to go for me, I wanted them to go for me then. So I did that. And I also sent all the details to everyone, including Buchanan's fellow sheriffs in Aberdeen. I sent them all the details to them at the court there. And so everyone knows about it. All the MSPs know about it. All the councillors in Aberdeen know about it. Everybody knows the background to this case. And I'm sure that very few of them can actually really dispute the facts about it. Has anybody got the guts to do it? The media know all about it. Has anybody got the guts to take this story further? I do hope so. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to Aberdeen myself, and I'm going to do my own little protest. I'm going to take a banner there, and I'm going to take leaflets, again with all the names of the people involved. We actually have blitzed Aberdeen with leaflets, by the way, to let the people in the areas where the paedophiles operate know about what's going on. And I'll be doing that again in Aberdeen in 2 weeks' time. And I will also be going, I'll be standing outside Marks and Spencer's, which I've never been to Aberdeen in my life, but I believe that's the place to stand, on Union Street. And it's also quite conveniently very close to the Sheriff's Court. So I'm going on a weekday, it'll be a Friday when I'm there, and I'm going to spend a bit of time at Marks and Spencer's, and then I'm going to go down to the Sheriff's Court with all the leaflets naming Sheriff Buchanan, and I'm going to hand them out there. As one way or another, I'm absolutely determined that justice must be served in this terrible, terrible case. It really is appalling. One other thing I will say, I'm almost at the end of my speech now, but Holly, in the nature of things, has been coming up with more information about other abusers, even after the 8th of September. And there are 3 other people, particularly, that we're very concerned about. One in particular is the head of Beechwood Special School in Aberdeen, where Holly was a pupil. His name is Andrew Young. Holly has confirmed that he abused her. He also abused her at the house of the police officer, Terry Major. And I understand that he's taking other children at this present time to be abused by paedophile rings in Aberdeen. While they're at school, the parents are taking them to school, he takes them, or has people taking them on the bus to his friends in his circle. So Young has been named as well. Have the police done anything about that? Have the social services done anything about it? No, they've done nothing. So this man is at large at the moment, quite apart from the rest of the paedophile gang, who can carry on their evil ways, knowing they have the full protection of the Lord Advocate of Scotland. This is effectively a state-sponsored rape gang, supposed to be a civilized society. Yet, you know, sometimes they ridicule people in other countries about the way they're governed, their legal system, but this is happening here in the UK, part of the United Kingdom, in Scotland right now. And nobody is doing anything about it. Nobody who has the power is doing anything about it at all. It's a terrible, terrible case. All I can say is I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make sure that people are brought to justice as quickly as possibly can, because we're not talking about past crimes here, we're talking about crimes that are going on at the moment. The Lord Advocate should be dismissed without any delay. She should be arrested and charged for repeatedly perverting the course of justice. Mr. Salmon knows it, as I said. Mr. McCaskill knows it. The curious thing we found out about Mr. McCaskill the other day, he used to work for Levy and McRae, the law firm who were representing Mrs. Angelini. By a strange coincidence. But what a can of worms. Absolutely terrible. It really is that bad. Would anybody like to ask any questions? There's a lot of other things, but I couldn't include everything. Thank you.
Very much for the call.
You're welcome.
No problem.
Bye.
All right, folks. 15 minutes left in the show. If you would like to get in touch with us here in the studio, give us a ring in the last 15 minutes. Myself and Robert Green here in the studio. 0161 202 1677. That is 0161 202 1677. And as I was just saying, please go to that Facebook group page. There are 12,000 members and growing. And of course, that group was actually taken down by Facebook last week, and then it was reinstated. Now, I'm not sure, obviously, of the politics that went on behind the scenes, but someone had it pulled and someone reinstated it there. So go to Facebook. We won't allow the state to cover up the Holly Greig paedophile scandal. 12,000 members, right at the top there. You have a link which I have just posted this very second, and it is the full audio of all the interviews which you have heard with Anne Greig tonight. Alright then, coming up before the end of the show, we're going to actually have 2 minutes of an interview I did with Holly Gregg herself. Of course, Holly has Down syndrome, but she's still a very clever girl, and she's still able to answer some of the questions I put to her, and it's heart touching. So just listen up for that. But right now, we're going to go to the last little part. It's only 1 minute long, and this is just where I asked Anne Gregg what she would like to see done about this whole affair. What would you like to see happen in the future regarding everything from your brother's death to Dennis Mackey to Holly? What would you like to see in the future in an ideal world?
In an ideal world, I want everyone brought to book. I want this whole thing to be thoroughly investigated. I want all the bodies that have written documents, and lied, to be held to book, and someone to be held accountable for all of this. Because this has destroyed my daughter's life and my life. And how many more little boys and girls are maybe having to go through that right now?
And in your opinion, the Scottish legal system has let you down drastically?
As far as I'm concerned, it's rotten to the core.
Absolutely damning interview there with Anne Gregg, and thank you so much to Anne for doing that with me. I know that it took a lot of courage, and we're talking about such sensitive information here, and she was very forthcoming, and hopefully you enjoyed listening to that tonight. That was the last part of that interview, but as I say, it is available online on Facebook. We won't allow the state to cover up the Holly Gregg paedophile scandal, and it is on there now if you want to go and listen to that. There are 10 minutes left. If anyone else out there would like to get in touch on the phone, we'd really like to hear from you. 0161 202 1677. We've got a call coming in now. Manchester Radio Online, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, it's David again here. I was actually beat up by one of the criminals in Aberdeen here, and I find it very funny that Holly got all this money, because when I was beat up, it took the police 5 weeks to go along and get hold of this guy. Then when I applied for criminal injuries money, they wrote to Grampian Police 7 times over a 2-year period to ask if I had a criminal record, which I don't have. So we're delaying the case. I had a crime file number, I had photographs of the injuries, I had doctor's reports, and I had so much difficulty getting money with all that reports and evidence, yet Anne got it with no crime file number. This is really, really funny.
So basically, you were a victim of crime. You got no money.
And I got money, but it took me 2 years.
Yeah. And do you think it's suspicious that Holly has been given this money when they still say that there's no crime being committed?
It's very funny, because I had to have doctor's reports, I had the police reports, I had the crime file numbers. They accessed all my medical records. When at the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, I put in a letter to my doctor, a mandate, giving him access to my medical records. After I signed it, I put down in the bottom of the letter only my medical records from the time of the assault. I then found out that my doctor had given all the medical records to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. I went along there to find out why, and he showed me the letter. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Board removed the part underneath my signature. It said only my medical records from the time of my assault. So the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board removed that, and they accessed all my medical records.
Well, David, we appreciate your input tonight, and we know that you've been on the brunt of a lot of wrongdoings from Grampian Police, so we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
No worries, sir. Thank you very much. All right, then. Just under 10 minutes left in the show. Going to go through a couple of emails now. This one is, I think it's from Steve. It says, "Hi, I have emailed several prominent people in Scotland, including Alex Salmon, but I've heard nothing back. I did, however, receive an email from George Galloway, and he said he was looking into the case. A few days later, the Palestine Telegraph picked up the story. God bless Holly and Robert and all who are trying to get this story out. Thanks, Steve." And I appreciate that there, Steve. Also, let me see what we've got here. Great show tonight. It's about time the general public stood up to be counted. We do have a voice, and I couldn't agree with you more with that. This story is about the story about this is going global. No one will silence the campaigners. This spreads further than Scotland. It's rife. Robert Greene is not alone in speaking out. Over 12,000 people in the field. This isn't going to go away until there's a proper investigation. Why hasn't there been a revolution already? Maybe it's coming. That's from Benny. Thank you so much for that email, Benny, and that's great words of encouragement to myself and Robert. Robert, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would, but thank you very much, Benny. That is wonderful what you've had to say, and let's hope that we can get a lot of people working together. I would just like to say at this point to you, Benny, and everyone else who's listening, that it certainly hasn't been a solo effort on my part. There's been a number, right from the start, there's been a small number of dedicated, brave, and highly intelligent people who have all helped in many, many ways. So I'd just like to thank them very much publicly for all the help that they've given and continue to give in this case.
Going back to this Facebook group page, it's on fire at the moment, and it's been on fire for quite a while now, as long as I've known about it. Loads of people already picking up the podcast of tonight's show. It's not the podcast of tonight's show, as it were. It's more 30 minutes exclusive interview just with the original interview I did with Anne Gregg, which is split up into like 10 parts, and we played it on the show tonight. So we're almost out of time. What we've got to play now is the actual recording of an interview I did with Holly Gregg herself. Now, folks, we've been talking about Holly all night long, so this is kind of little chat I had with Holly a bit earlier on in the week. Turn your radio up, listen to this. What would you like to see to happen to your dad?
I would say enough. I've had it. No more do that anymore.
What would you like to happen to Daddy?
In jail.
In jail. He deserves to be in jail.
Yes.
And what about the other people? What do you think? Do they deserve to be in jail too?
Yes, a whole lot.
Do you miss your Uncle Roy?
Yes.
And what do you think? Do you remember the day that your Uncle Roy caught your dad with you?
Yes.
What do you think Uncle Roy said to your dad?
Do you deal and finger her again? Kind of.
Yeah, can you remember the people that was doing things?
And Helen's house.
And anyone else's house?
Sylvia.
And anyone else's house?
And Win. Evelyn.
And was your dad there every time, or was sometimes you there on your own?
Yeah.
You were sometimes there on your own?
Yeah.
And would your dad bring you there and then go away?
Yeah.
And your carer would take you to someone's house and leave you there?
Yes.
And when you were there, bad things would happen?
Yes.
And then would your dad come back and pick you up?
Yes.
What would you like to say to anyone? You know, some people have set up the Facebook group. You know, some people's on the internet trying to raise awareness and trying to get justice for you. What message have you got for them?
Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of people will be glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And you appreciate, and you know that people, this is a message from me and everyone else that's trying to help you, that we're just saying that we support you and we're going to do all we can to get justice for you, right?
Yes.
You're a very brave girl.
Yes.
There you go, folks. Deep stuff. That was Holly Gregg herself speaking to me a bit earlier on in the week. We're pretty much out of time. Robert, anything you would like to add before we go?
Very little, apart from thanking everybody so much for all your support. And you've got two wonderful ladies there, Holly Gregg and her mum Anne. They really are terrific. They deserve every support that can be given to them. And I do thank you all for your kindness and your good wishes and your bravery as well. Thank you so much.
And on behalf of everyone listening and myself, Robert, good luck with everything. Good luck with your court case. And hopefully they don't come after you again. And I mean, to an extent you do encourage this court case because it'll just highlight the case further.
Well, it will, yes. Bring it on is what I say.
But hopefully you don't have to see the inside of a cell again, because that is
definitely... Keep my fingers crossed, Tony. Don't say that yet.
We haven't been outside yet. We never know. Paul, any police waiting for us out there, no?
I'll check it out.
We'll send someone out to check. We've got a couple of bodyguards here. We'll be all right. Thank you very much to everybody who's got in touch. The MSN has been packed out tonight. The phones were busy. Thank you to everyone who got in touch through the email as well, and the Facebook. And yeah, just thank you very much, Robert Green.
Thank you very much indeed, Tony, and thanks for doing a great show and helping to highlight these things. We wish people had as much courage as you have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right then, folks, I'll be back again next week with more stories to tell and more shocking things needing uncovered.